across the United States of America. Check your AM, FM listing nearest you, plus ESPN radios on Sirius XM, Channel 80, plus ESPN radio simulcast over the live national television airwaves of ESPN News. Number to call up, as always, is 888-SAY-ESPN. It's 888-729-3776. The Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. Quote, buy, and save on home insurance with Progressive's new Home Quote Explorer. Only at Progressive.com. Always my honor and privilege to have my next guest on the line. Always does an outstanding job for us. For years was doing college football, elevated his game to the National Football League level. Now one of the preeminent voices in the NFL, covering Monday Night Football for us in the booth without Jason Witten this year. The Boogermobile is gone. He's in the booth with our very own Joe Tessitore. I'm talking about the one and only Booger McFarland is on the line with yours truly right now. What's going on, Big Time? How are you, man?
I'm doing good, Stephen. And how are you, man?
I'm doing all right. Before we feature these Monday night games and get into yesterday's game, your reaction to learning that Antonio Brown would end up with the New England Patriots, particularly after all that nonsense that transpired since he had arrived in Oakland with the Raiders a couple of months ago. Your thoughts?
Well, I was definitely shocked. I like everyone else, saw all the people on social media saying, what if this happens? And then, lo and behold, it does happen. I'm going to lean on the side of trusting Bill Belichick. And I know everyone says, what if he doesn't conform to the Patriot ways? What if he doesn't go in there and toe the company line? I think Bill Belichick has earned the right to kick the tires on Antonio Brown. And they guaranteed him some money. And I think if Antonio goes in there and does his job, things are going to be fine. I think if Antonio goes in there and he kind of goes astray, I think Bill Belichick will act accordingly. And, he's done this before with personality, whether it was Chad Johnson or Corey Dillon or Randy Moss or, guys that have come in there that have had some questionable personalities or questionable baggage with them. Bill Belichick has dealt with this before, and so I trust him when it comes to that. But just like everyone else, man, my first thought was, man, the rich get richer.
Interesting analogy, because I got to admit to you, Booger McFarland, it sort of deflated me to some degree about this NFL season, because I know anything could happen any given Sunday. The movie with Al Pacino, LL Cool J, Jamie Foxx, I always loved that movie. But the reality is that when you look at the inordinate amount of talent that the New England Patriots have, particularly led by Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, when you got Josh Gordon and Antonio Brown on the field with Julian Edelman, it's like, my goodness, how are you going to defend against that? Do you really see teams being able to compete with the New England Patriots this season?
Well, it's not just about talent. It's about the execution. And let's not forget, a lot of people were ready to crown the Cleveland Browns with all that talent, and we saw what happened yesterday with them. So I think when you look at the way the Patriots execute and the consistency at which they do it, to me, that's what I marvel at. Tom Brady picked up last night, just like he hadn't been off ball, for the entire summer and hadn't played a lot of football. I mean, he looked tremendous. And so, yes, on paper, it looks good. It looks really, really good. I think Kansas City is going to have a lot to say. The Chargers looked good yesterday, even though they had to squeak and win out. There are teams out there. I think there are the haves and the have-nots, and the Patriots are definitely in the haves category before Antonio Brown and definitely with them now.
Booger McFarland right here with Stephen A., ESPN Radio, ESPN News. So let's get into Sunday's action real quick. What surprised you most based on what you saw?
Well, I think Cleveland not playing to the level that we all thought that they would play to, not necessarily from a talent standpoint, but they were very undisciplined. Baker Mayfield threw 3 picks. They had 18 penalties. And I know Freddie Kitchens. I think Freddie is going to be one heck of a football coach. But the fact that his team didn't perform well in the discipline category, turning the football over and penalties. And we got to remember, although they're very, very talented, they are a young football team. And, my biggest concern with Cleveland going into the season was not necessarily whether they would be talented enough, but whether and when they would learn how to win. In the National Football League, talent wins you a few games. Understanding how to win games wins you a lot of them, because you got to know that there are 5 to 6 plays that are going to decide every game. The problem is we don't know when those 5 or 6 plays are going to happen. So the consistency at which you must play every down is paramount. And I don't think Cleveland realizes that just yet, because they are young. And young players, live in this microwave society. You want everything right now. You don't want to do the consistent things over a long period of time and not knowing. And so I think Cleveland has to learn that. When you look at how Seattle played yesterday, I realize they won, and I'm not taking anything away from Cincinnati, but I was shocked to turn the TV on and see Seattle in a dogfight with Cincinnati. I don't think the expectations are as high for the Bengals this year, and I think we give Pete Carroll a lot of credit for the types of teams that he fields, physical football teams. Russell Wilson is one of the better quarterbacks in the National Football League, and they were in a struggle. Now, I'm not going to overreact to anything, but those were probably my two biggest surprises.
My biggest surprise with Lamar Jackson and how I saw him perform for the Baltimore Ravens. I didn't expect the kid to look that good. Last time we saw him was in a playoff game against the Los Angeles Chargers. Over 3 quarters and 2 minutes, he literally only had 3 completions for 25 yards. He was absolutely putrid until those last few minutes of that game. And so we come to this year, and he looked absolutely phenomenal. Now, was that a product of him and his ability to throw the 10 pounds that he's put on, the work that John Harbaugh and his staff have done with this kid? Or was it the fact that he's going up against a Miami Dolphins team that barely looks like an NFL team right now?
I'm going to give him all the credit. I've been very critical of Lamar. I think, I watched the same game that you watched last year against the Chargers where he was awful. But you got to give he and John Harbaugh a lot of credit based on the offseason. They changed the entire offense for this young man. And he showed yesterday that not only can he play the quarterback position, he's gotten better at it. Now, I'm not ready to crown him yet and say he needs to be an elite quarterback club. I think the Dolphins are going to be less than what most NFL teams would aspire to be on a bad day. Like, they're going to be terrible this year. And they can say whether or not they want to do it on purpose or not. That's for another conversation. I just think that all you can do is base off what the tape has said. And the tape is saying that Lamar was absolutely perfect from a passer rating standpoint yesterday. I think Hollywood Brown gives him a deep threat that's going to force defenses not to crowd the line of scrimmage. Let's not forget, Lamar didn't run the ball a lot yesterday. I think that was done on purpose. And so I think the threat of Hollywood is going to open up Lamar and his ability to get outside the pocket. But make no mistake about it, so far so good. I want to see it consistently. I think that's when I'll change my opinion and say, you know what, he's arrived. It's year 2. It's game number 2 coming up. Let me see him do it a little bit more consistently.
How disappointed were you in watching the Steelers last night? It's one thing to lose to the Patriots. It's another thing to get obliterated 33-3. What were your thoughts about that?
I was disappointed. I think Mike Tomlin is one of the better coaches in the National Football League, and he's proven that over the course of his career. And I would have bet anything that his team would show up on opening night against the Patriots because that's their nemesis. That's the team that everyone says that the Steelers cannot beat, and they can't match up. No matter how good and how many weapons that the Steelers have had, they've never been able to beat the Patriots. And I think, Mike Tomlin was bothered. You could visibly see it on his face last night. But I still believe in the Steelers, Stephen A. I still think that, Connor is a very good back. Ben Roethlisberger, I think he's a Hall of Fame quarterback, and we know about Juju Smith-Schuster. Defensively, though, they're going to have to figure out on the back end how they cover people because that's been their Achilles heel. And General Manager Kevin Colbert, they've drafted a lot of secondary guys. I mean, it seems like they draft 2 or 3 every year. But for whatever reason, whether it's the types of coverages they use, whether it's in their mind right now, Tom Brady just plays tricks on them. And if it were me, I would just go back to the basics. Quarterbacks like a Brady or Breeze or Rodgers, sometimes, man, you try to trick them and you trick yourself. And I think you got to go back to the basics and say, you know what? If we're going to play man coverage, let's just line up and play man coverage. If we're going to play zone, let's everybody rely on each other and do our job because right now, I think it's more mental than it is physical. I think they have talent to cover the Patriots, but it seems to be mental. It seems to me that's what it is.
Booker McFarland right here with Stephen A., ESPN Radio and ESPN News. You call it Monday Night Football, so you'll be on here pretty much every week talking about these upcoming Monday Night Football games. The nightcap would be the Denver Broncos against the Oakland Raiders. We've talked so much about what we expected from the Oakland Raiders with Antonio Brown. Now that he's not going to be there, what do we expect from them now? What kind of damage do you think all of this nonsense with Antonio Brown, which led to his imminent departure, ultimately will do to the Oakland Raiders in this 2019 NFL season?
Well, there's no doubt. I think the players inside the locker room are probably going to think about it more. John Gruden has had offenses before where he didn't have a dominant number 1 receiver. He relies on his system and his play calling, and he thinks that, I can out-scheme you, which he's done a lot of times. He's a Super Bowl winning head coach. I think the running back he took out of Alabama, Josh Jacobs, is going to be featured tonight, both running the football, catching the ball out of the backfield. I think Derek Carr has a new weapon in Tyrell Williams. You're going to see him on a lot of deep passes. They have a tight end named Darren Waller. I think is going to be a focal point, much like Jared Cook was last year. So I think when you look at the offense in Oakland, they're going to put points up. My concern is their defense. It's still the same question. Who's going to rush the passer? You traded away Khalil Mack. You brought in Arden Key. We haven't seen much out of him just yet. And so I want to see who up front and on defense is going to lead to a pass rush, because if they can't get the football back, that defense will be on the field a long time. I think the Raiders are still – I know the talent has improved, but I still think they're going to struggle throughout the season.
Booger, help us out here. How are we to look at John Gruden at this particular moment in time? We saw what concessions he was willing to make for Antonio Brown. And then the backdrop of all of this is that Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper are gone and both shining in Chicago and Dallas, respectively. How are we to look at John Gruden right now as football fans?
I think you view Gruden, like you view a lot of coaches in the National Football League. They're paid to win games, and they're going to do whatever it takes, and they'll say whatever it takes to help them win football games. I think that's why he has Mike Mayock as a GM, so he can take care of some of the business end, whether it be contracts or taking some of the public criticism for moves that they make. But John Gruden is a football coach. He wants to be on the field with the best players that he can. Was he willing to make concessions for Antonio Brown? Absolutely. And I think you'll get this, Stephen A. In our business, when you are good at what you do, your bosses are willing to make concessions because they know you can affect the bottom line. Mm-hmm. And when you affect the bottom line, that's good for business. Well, John Gruden knows that Antonio Brown can affect his bottom line, which is winning games. And he was willing to make concessions. Now that he's gone, I think he has to move on. And he's going to have to really make sure that the locker room understands that. And as players, we know that. We know Antonio Brown is a top 5 wide receiver in football. And on our team, we're a better team when he's there. Now that he's moved on, somebody else has got to step up, and we move on. But I view him just like all these other coaches. They are trying to win games. And as far as character and standing for something, they all say the right thing. But guess what, man? Their job description says coach football, win games, period. It doesn't say they got to be a humanitarian. It doesn't say they got to be a leader. It says we got to win football games, and that's what they're paid to do.
I could get into how that analogy is in no way applicable to me at ESPN, but I won't, Booger. I'll move on from there. Let me ask you about we're talking to Booger McFarland, voice of Monday Night Football right here with Stephen A., ESPN Radio, ESPN News. Let's get into Vic Fangio and his Denver Broncos. I don't know what to expect from this team this year. Vic Fangio obviously was in Chicago last year. They had an elite defense. They still have an elite defense without him, with Chuck Pagano leading the way if Thursday night's game against the Packers were any kind of indication. But now Vic Fangio is the head man in Denver. Haven't heard much about them this preseason. Don't know how good they're going to be defensively. Damn sure don't know how good they're going to be offensively with Joe Flacco at the helm right now. What do we expect from the Denver Broncos this year?
Well, first of all, I'm so happy for Vic Fangio. You talk about a guy that's waited over 3 decades to be a head coach. He's a grinder, somebody that nobody gave him anything, and now he gets his opportunity. Definitely can relate to him. His defense in Denver is going to be very similar, I think, to his defense in Chicago. May not be as gaudy with the numbers, giving up few points and things of that nature, but he's got 2 bookends, Bradley Chubb and Von Miller. He's got good secondary play, maybe not great yet. You still have one of the better nickel corners in football in Chris Harris Jr. I think the defense is going to keep him in a lot of games. The key is going to be Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco has to remember what color the Broncos are wearing each and every game, because if they don't turn the football over, I think it's going to be a lot of what we saw in Baltimore when Baltimore was really rolling. Remember, Joe Flacco, he's never been a guy that's going to throw for 350 a game. But what he does, he moves the ball down the field, gets the ball to his tight ends. They have a pretty good one, a rookie in Denver named Noah Fant. They're going to feature him. I think they're going to run the football with this kid, Phillip Lindsay, in this zone scheme. It's going to be a lot of play action. Flacco outside the pocket. Let's not forget he is very athletic. He likes to be outside the pocket. So imagine the style of play we saw when Flacco was at the pinnacle in Baltimore. You saw that those gritty games, low-scoring games, Flacco Flacco leading the drive here and there. I think you're going to see a lot of that in Denver, and that's the way they want to play football. They're pretty explosive on the outside. Emmanuel Sanders, Cortland Sutherland, they have players, but I still think a defensive coach like Coach Fangio is going to want to play it close to the vest. So I think Denver, even though we don't know what to expect from them, I think they're going to be pretty good. I would lean toward them tonight against the Oakland Raiders, but I can't wait. And I'm so happy for Vic Fangio. Someone has paid his dues and waited for the opportunity to be a head coach.
Let's talk about New Orleans hosting the Houston Texans tonight. The Houston Texans no longer have Jadeveon Clowney. Huge loss for them, or something you believe they can recover from?
Well, there's no doubt it's a huge loss, and they're going to have to recover from it. You don't lose a physical mismatch like Jadeveon Clowney and just say you're going to replace him with somebody, because they don't, quite honestly, they don't have anybody on their roster that can do what he did. They're going to have to use a couple of different guys. One of them, Whitney Merciless, is going to try to fill that role, kind of that athletic freak role where we can put you as a linebacker, as a defensive end. We can blitz you up the middle. And there's a big onus that's going to be put on J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt's a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. He is a surefire Hall of Famer. And now his quote-unquote running mate is gone. And so you're going to have to step up. You know, to whom much is given, much is expected. You've been given a lot of talent. And the expectations for him, I think, are going to be ramped up tonight. But make no mistake about it, Stephen A., the Houston Texans are ran by one guy, and that's Deshaun Watson. And I've watched him play since he was at Clemson. When he gets in situations where he feels like his back is against the wall, he goes in the phone booth, and he comes out, and he comes out, and he's got his cape on. And I think if this game is close in the fourth quarter tonight, he's going to try to do the same thing. That's the guy that runs this show. That's the heartbeat of this football team. And it still is, regardless of whether Clowney is here or not.
What are your thoughts about the New Orleans Saints this year? We looked at the Philadelphia Eagles with Deshaun Jackson yesterday. That was special. We can't ignore the Rams. They beat Carolina. Atlanta flopped against Minnesota. We look at it from that perspective. Is it about Philadelphia and New Orleans, or is it just about the New Orleans Saints and it being their division this year, conference this year?
No, yeah, I think that New Orleans is probably right in there with 4, 5, or 6 teams in the NFC that feel like they have a legitimate shot to come out of the conference and represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. They're loaded, Stephen A. Drew Brees runs the show. I think the MVP of the National Football, my pick, National Football League this year, my pick was Alvin Kamara. I think he is outstanding. Mm-hmm. Someone told me this, and I had to go back and look because obviously I didn't grow up watching Gale Sayers. They say he's the closest thing to Gale Sayers that this league has seen, and that is a lofty statement to make. Mm-hmm. No Mark Ingram now. Okay, Latavius Murray tries to come in and be the physical running back. I don't know how that's going to work out, but that's going to play out. Michael Thomas is a top 5 receiver. The offensive line is really, really good. They are loaded across the board. Their defense, especially on the back end, their secondary has to be a little better. It was better toward the end of last year than it was at the beginning. But when you add all that up, they should be playing late in January with the right to go to the Super Bowl. It's going to come down to how the ball bounces. And we know the last couple of years, the ball hasn't bounced their way. With the Minneapolis Miracle, the non-defensive pass interference call in New Orleans, it takes a little luck to win a Super Bowl, and they are praying that this is their year. But they are right there with the Eagles, the Bears, the Rams. The New Orleans Saints are right there with that group of teams.
Let me go back. We're talking to Book of Fallen right here with Stephen A., ESPN Radio, ESPN News. Let me go back to Baltimore for a second because they trounced the Miami Dolphins 59-10 yesterday. That was just a spectacular performance of Lamar Jackson, but also a disgraceful performance by the Miami Dolphins. You hear people accusing the Dolphins of actually tanking this season. Where does Booger McFarland lie in that kind of thinking about the Dolphins?
I don't think they're tanking. I think every player goes out there on the field trying to do their job because we're all getting paid at this level. I think, if you want to blame or accuse anybody, I think you could look at the front office and say, have we put a talented enough team on the field to compete? Players and coaches will never tank because that's not in our DNA. That is never going to happen. I would refute anyone that says that. But when you start getting above the coaches, when you get into the guy that's choosing the groceries, and you get into the ownership, they can decide whether or not they want to field certain types of teams, certain players. Who do we want to pay? And so to me, there's no doubt that this is not a very talented football team in Miami. Now, is that done on purpose? I think the people to ask are the people above Brian Flores, because from Brian Flores on down, his coaching staff and the players, there is no doubt they aren't tanking. I think those questions should be asked of the hierarchy and ownership down in Miami, because I think the answer would really lie there and not with the coaching staff.
Well, it's interesting because you got Chris Gray, the general manager. You got a black general manager, black coach in the National Football League in Miami, and their team looks absolutely atrocious. So much so that I think it was Mike Florio for Pro Football Talk, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure, but it was somebody over there with Pro Football Talk that reported that several players, I think they reported on NBC last night, that several players for the Miami Dolphins immediately contacted their agents after the loss in an effort to get them the hell out of Miami. To that, Booger McFarland says what?
Man, when you get beat 59-10, I'll be wanting to get out of there too, Steve. Hey, man, listen.
What happened to it being one game? What happened to it being one game?
Listen, South Beach is good. Prime 112 and Miles are great, but I can't stand getting beat 59-10 too many times now.
Right.
So I think it was guys kind of seeing the writing on the wall. You know, they understand at the quarterback position, Fitzpatrick, he's a placeholder. Josh Rosen, I'm not sure if he's ready. So we don't have a quarterback. You know, you trade away your star left tackle and Laramie Tunsil. You trade away your playmaker, even if he is outspoken in Kenny Stills. And now it's like, okay, who's going to make plays for us? So guys start to see the writing on the wall. It's going to be this way. This is just game one, and we're going to see this the rest of the season. And it's a long season. It's between now and after Christmas. So I think those guys that probably call their agents, they're frustrated. I get it. I understand. What I would tell them is this. Hey, it's okay to be frustrated as long as you show up to work. And when you get that check on Tuesday, take it to the bank. And as long as it passes, then keep showing up to work. When that check starts bouncing, that's when you can start worrying. Until then, you got a family to feed, man. Go to work and do your job.
Booger McFarland, man, which game are you calling tonight?
We are calling Texans at Saints. I'm down here in New Orleans, Stephen A.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. And even though, Jason Witten, I loved having him on the show every week. Nice watching him catch a touchdown pass in Dallas yesterday.
Huh?
That wasn't bad. That wasn't bad. I feel sorry for Saquon Barkley. He has no help. Zero help whatsoever. It's pretty damn bad. It's pretty damn bad. And it's bad here in New York where you can't get, and with the Giants, you don't have a team. You just got one man. And with the Jets, you got a decent team without a kicker. You just can't make this stuff up, Booger. You just can't make it up.
Stephen A., if I were you, I would be hoping that the Yankees get healthy. That way you can ride that horse till they can't ride no more.
I'm going to try. I'm looking forward to hearing you in the booth tonight handling your business, my man. I know you will. Thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Anytime. Thanks, Stephen A.
All right, the one and only Booger McFarland. You'll hear him weekly right here with Stephen A. Smith Show, ESPN Radio, ESPN News. 888-SAY-ESPN is always the number to call up. That's 888-729-3776. We'll get back to your calls and more on all the games that took place yesterday. And, of course, the Antonio Brown fiasco. All that and more coming up. Don't touch that dial. You're listening live to Stephen A. ESPN Radio, ESPN News, by the way. Do you have frequent heartburn?